Welcome to the Restoring Our City podcast. We are here with another episode in our series about critically thinking. And I am here with our fellow co-host, Jeswin Thomas. Hello, sir.
How's it going?
It's going good. I'm enjoying this series where we are actually doing some homework on topics. Instead of knee-jerk reactions. And I think our little tagline for this series is less arguing and more analyzing. And I think folks are arguing a lot more in this world. Maybe it's for clicks and views and things like that. I don't know. But we are critically thinking about certain topics, and we bring you a new episode every week to talk about one of those polarizing topics. But instead of just assuming things, we want to do some homework a little bit and then try to make some rational decisions on some of those things and really hear from you as well. And we always want to bring our faith into this conversation as well. But I think we're really called to critically think about subjects. So, Jeswin, I know we've had we've had an episode about the framework, but just to remind our listeners, can you talk a little bit about how we go about critically thinking about topics?
Right. And once again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. And honestly, when Jobbin and I sat down and sort of brainstormed together a framework that we wanted to use for this series, is simply to first, what is the idea or the question that we're going to be looking at? Two, what are the opinions, the different views on that idea? Three, what are the assumptions that go into those opinions? And are there actual objective measures that support those assumptions or refute those assumptions? Finally, what are the implications that you have to live with if you choose one view over the other? And just some personal conclusions from both of us, because we don't want to leave you hanging on where we stand on these subjects either.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a doozy today. We have got a doozy of a topic. And I think this is something that we've been all hearing about. We've been living this in this crazy world for over a year now. And there is very polarized opinions about choosing the vaccine. We are actually talking about critically thinking about vaccinations. And before you go forward and start to roast us with this episode, I would say listen to your medical experts and talk to your doctor about any medical advice. But I think at the same time, we are called to do our due diligence and our research. And we want to make sure that we critically think about our choices. And so we have a great episode from last season with Dr. Lenoge Samuel, who is a microbiologist from the Henry Ford Clinic. So shout out to Dr. Lenoge Samuel and his team out there. And he gives a lot of great expert advice about the vaccine too. So feel free to check that episode out. But we are talking about critically thinking about this. So Jeswin, why is this so important? Why is this a topic that's so hotly debated and discussed?
Absolutely. And just to think about, how prevalent this question is, we were looking at stats for today, and it looks like only about 60% of our population has received one dose, with just a smidge, about 51% that is fully vaccinated. So to be honest, it's almost a 50-50 split here of people that are fully vaccinated and not. So we guarantee that someone sitting next to you in a pew, or someone sitting next to you on a bus, or maybe at work if you're going back in, is possibly not vaccinated. And the questions more so become like, how do we maybe form an opinion without demonizing that other person?
Exactly. And I think that's one of those things that I've been hearing, and seeing on social media, or just hearing from fellow friends, family, coworkers, or whoever you talk to, is they have very strong opinions about these things, for or against, right? Sure. So as Christians, as a community, why is it so important for us to talk about this subject critically?
Yeah, and just like you said, we of course may have our opinions and our agendas that we sort of want to share with the world, but as Christians, we can't just have that attitude of maybe just shut up and take the vaccine. Or on the flip side, we can't have the attitude of God will just protect you from all of this, ye of little faith. And honestly, both of those sides are just a bit too hostile in a Christian community, right? If we're called to strive for unity, and we do have our opinions that we should, how do we do this in a way that is not, destroying the unity within the body? And I think that's what we're kind of focused on here.
Yeah. And so I think we should kind of go through our framework and talk about those opinions and those different views that folks have. So maybe let's kind of start with that first opinion where folks say that you should take the vaccine based on the evidence. And maybe we can kind of break down some of those assumptions that folks have within those opinions.
Absolutely. I think, the first big assumption is the vaccine is effective. Even Yale Medicine sort of cites this as it's about 95% effective in preventing COVID-19 without a prior infection. I think assumption number two that comes here is, hey, we should trust the experts. I don't know anything about infectious diseases, but with the CDC and the NIH, their advice is to sort of protect us and guide us as a society on what we should do. And they are the experts here. And finally, it's for society's good. If we want to return to normalcy, if we want a herd immunity for those that can't take the vaccine, even the Mayo Clinic suggests those are things that we ought to do, and almost kind of watch out for your brother and help them along too is one of the responsibilities we have in order to take this vaccine.
Yeah, and those are all very solid reasons, right? And those are very solid reasons, and there's a lot of analysis and data to kind of back that up too. So I guess on the flip side, so for some of those folks who might be thinking, hey, I don't really want to take the vaccine, or it might not be necessary, or it's unwise. What are some of the underlying assumptions that maybe you've heard and are out there for those folks?
Yeah, the first one is, even if you get COVID, there is a pretty low chance of mortality. One study that we saw over here is that only about 1 in 150 people that actually get COVID-19 will pass from it, and only about 10% of the population. When we were looking at the numbers in total, there have been about 34.7 million cases, according to the CDC, in a population of over 300 million. So, 1 in 150 multiplied by 10%, you have a pretty low chance to actually die from COVID-19. I think number two is, and this is almost a irrefutable fact, is there are no long-term studies on the vaccine. The studying of the vaccine only occurred about a year and a half ago. About 18 months ago is when the first study through Pfizer began. And so we only have that much data, and we don't know what the future holds.
Yeah. And I think even just kind of talking through this, just to kind of throw this out there for our listeners, there are assumptions, but like, you see how we're kind of doing this, where we're actually looking at both sides and not just like, hey, I'm going to just shut you out and I'm not going to even take into account this other side. It's almost like, hey, let's kind of hear things out. Let's hear where people are coming from, because this is not, we're not trying to sway you one way or another. We're not writing you a prescription. Let's just tell you that. But it's one of those things where let's hear why folks believe or make choices that they do, and what are those underlying assumptions, and then start to look at the evidence that kind of supports it, right? So given that, I think there's a couple other assumptions that I've heard too, where there's folks are a little skeptical. I think we talked about trusting the experts, but there's another assumption on this other side where folks who might be hesitant to take the vaccine, that they are a little skeptical. Can you talk a little bit about that, where folks don't trust the experts actually?
Yeah. And, part of it is, of course, with an ever-changing world, maybe advice changes. However, that advice seems to be sort of flip-flopping back and forth here. Sometimes you need a mask, sometimes you don't. Maybe you need a mask again. Sometimes, maybe a 2-week shutdown will work, and then, maybe it extends for a couple of months. And, when people think about experts, you expect them to be experts on a certain subject. So sometimes when there's uncertainty there, maybe trust is a little bit lost. And finally, I think, our final assumption here is it's sort of not being forced to do something that you may not want to. And I think when we were looking at it, according to Becker's hospital review here, only 4 states to this point ban vaccination status for employment, and that's only been Florida, Texas, Montana, and Arkansas. But in any of the other states, there are no legal precedents that would, sort of bar an employer from forcing you to take the vaccination before you return to work.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different leaders and different rules and governance, but at the same time, there's this kind of underlying message of infringing on your freedom, right? And maybe just dictating what somebody can and put into their body and what they
Right.
should. And so I know there's a lot of debate around schools too, around and kids and wearing masks and things like that. And there's just, people are feeling really uncomfortable about this. So now that we've looked at our assumptions and kind of the reasons why people make the decisions that they make, how do we look at some of the implications?
Yeah, and Joby, I think the best way to talk about this is maybe from a little bit of a personal standpoint here too. I chose to get the vaccine as soon as I could, and that was back, I believe, in February uh, of this year. And so for myself, I think it kind of helped alleviate some of that fear, right? That fear of like, man, if I go outside, am I going to catch COVID-19? If I don't, douse my hands in hand sanitizer, wash everything that I buy, and, like wear a mask, and God forbid it slips a little bit, right? There was a sense of at least some calm that came for me when I chose to at least have the opinion and take that vaccination for myself.
Yeah, no,
I don't know if you feel similarly to that.
No, I think you brought up a really interesting emotion. It's fear, right? People are fearful of the disease. I think people feel fearful of rules and regulations as well. And I think they're also fearful of just like how new this is, or you pointed out long-term studies. Me personally, I did take the vaccine. I'm that type of person who, I think I told you this once, that I'm not the type of guy who to buy the first iPhone. I'm not that guy who's like in line. All right, the next, I'm going to stay at minute. No, I'm going to wait till the next version comes out.
Sure.
Work out the bugs. But yeah, I did wait a little bit, but I did choose to take it, based on the data and talking to medical experts and things like that. And people I trust, but, I don't want to discount the fear that people have as well. And I don't think that's unsubstantiated. There are some fringe opinions out there, and there's lots of folks who are saying crazy things, even biblically, right? Like there's I think I saw some viral video going around. I didn't even want to watch it. Some of it was just like, Jesus said, don't take this. And I'm like, huh?
Oh,
what are you talking about? Or these stories about chips and I don't know. But anyway,
Lay's potato.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what's happening here? There are some fringe things out there, but at the same time, like this, I don't want to discount the fears and the hesitancy that people have. I don't think we should demonize them, like you talked about earlier, for one way or the other. Like, I think we have to make a decision, and we have to be experts in our own sense of like doing our research, right? We can't all be medical doctors, but I have to be responsible and knowledgeable about my body and my community as well, right? I think that's an important part of this too. I think this is a very important topic, but like maybe from our Christian perspective, maybe from just a biblical community, how should we maybe talk about this? How should we handle this topic when it comes to like living in communion with our fellow, brothers and sisters in Christ?
Yeah, and that honestly is a tricky one. And it was funny when we were talking about different topics we could critically think about. I think both of us were a little bit hesitant to even open the door to talking about the vaccinations, because we do know that this is a hot topic that does stir up emotions within us. And, I think maybe having conversations like this to at least sit down and potentially understand the other side, it helps. But I think further than that, I think it is really thinking about, hey, even if I feel like my side has the truth, looking at Christ once again, right? It's not just to present the truth, but present that truth in love, right? And I know the word says a bruised reed, he will not break, right? So to show that this is a savior that is both extremely powerful, the God of the universe, but is loving hearted and tender as well. So is there a way that we can have those conversations with one another in that same manner?
Yeah. I think on our first episode, you talked about like the gospel, and sometimes people weaponize the gospel. And I feel like they're kind of doing that with this subject too, right? It's kind of, I think I saw somebody post something about like, well, we should, Jesus cared for the least of these. And so that's why you should care for the least of the people in your community and get the vaccine. And it's kind of like, well, huh? Uh, but at the same time, it's like, people are like, well, he's going to have this hedge of protection over you, and he's going to, you get these preachers who are like, no, don't worry about anything. You don't.
Right.
So it's like, man, why are people like using Jesus as a pawn in this argument to
Sure.
persuade people? It's kind of strange. So,
And even more than that, Jobin is also seeing some of the merits on the other side. I think there is some merit in saying, hey, it's okay to be a little bit hesitant if you're worried about long-term effects, and saying that's potentially real,
yeah,
but also on the flip side, like not to completely discount the other side. I personally, if we're talking about some personal conclusions, if I want to jump the gun a little bit, I do hope that you do take the vaccine. But more than that, I did want to say, there is some merit to saying, what exactly do we feel about being forced to take something now, even though this may be good, who knows what's down the line? And where does that precedence come in to say, well, this is for society's good, you have to do this
right.
as an individual? And I think there is merit to at least considering that subject as well.
Yeah, I mean, because are we setting a precedent for other things, right? And I think that's where the fear
Mm-hmm.
that people have, like we talked a little bit about, the mandates from certain states, but then there's companies and employers who are requiring vaccination to continue your employment there. And so I think that's one of those things that people are worried about, because like, hey, maybe it's vaccines one day and then it's something else the next day. And it's kind of
Sure.
like, where do we stop or draw the line? And it's kind of hard to say when we're talking about a specific, you know, unique scenario like this worldwide pandemic that we're going through. And to me, like my personal conclusion too, just speaking about that is I do trust the experts in the sense of like talking to medical professionals, and I think everybody's situation is different, but at the same time, like we should talk about how do we protect each other, especially if this is impacting so many people globally and it's so unique, and it's not like the flu and things like this. It's I think we have to talk to our medical experts to ultimately make a decision. It's not like one of those things that you could just read some articles and then say, yes, this is how I feel and this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and to add to that a little bit, too, Joe, but I think we discount the fact to see how blessed we are to even live in this country. Many people around the world don't have that choice. That choice is made for them because they cannot take the vaccine even if they wanted to.
Yeah.
Here, at least we can have a debate because there are options, which first off is a blessing, but then too, even in thinking a little bit more, how does this personally impact me? I'm throwing a wedding this year, and I want to have all my friends, family, Stephanie's friends, family, my fiance, friends, family there. But of course, a small Indian wedding is quite large
How do you do
by
that? That's
any
impossible.
objective standard.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
to at least have it on our minds, our hope is that our guests come and are vaccinated, so we could at least have a little bit of peace that, hey, being here isn't a detriment to you, because we want you here and we want your presence here. But ultimately, we also don't want anything bad to happen to you
Yeah.
because of that. So that's been on my mind more recently.
Yeah, and no, it's interesting because it's a very different world that we live in now, right? Like I think about just this past year, it's like, my son is so young, he's about to turn 2, but like how many experiences and like friends and family could we have seen a lot more
Mhm.
often and more frequently? And could we have enjoyed this short Chicago summer a little bit more if it was just easier to go outside and hang out with people, right?
Yeah.
Without this fear of getting sick, right? And I mean, we talked about masks and stuff like that. People don't even know how to put their mask on. Like it's kind of like, come on, like even with those mandates, people are not following the rules. So it's kind of like, what could we have? And you don't just think about yourself; you're thinking about your family as well, and kids going to school. Like, yeah, there's so many personal things. That's why we can't demonize people, because it's not just their own selfish opinion. It's
Mhm.
they might be thinking of others as well. So I think stop arguing with each other and stop demonizing each other, but hear the other side and break it down and look at what are those assumptions? What are people actually thinking of when they choose to make the decisions that they are? And I think it will help if we go through the exercise of critically thinking about some of these topics. So
yeah. And I did want to add, even though maybe myself and Jobin agreed here and said, hey, maybe we looked at the evidence and we would hope that you also take the vaccination. Maybe you disagree with us. And honestly, we would love to hear from you, right? This is an open conversation, and that's what we're hoping to foster with this series. So once again, rather than demonizing you and your choices, we would love to share a meal and just talk about this with you too, because ultimately we're striving here not for just diversity in anything else, but also diversity in our thoughts and ultimately unity within the body of Christ.
Absolutely. Like you mentioned, the vaccination rates are, like about 50%, right? When we're talking about fully vaccinated, and it's like, you might be sitting next to somebody at church, right? Like who might not be vaccinated. And that doesn't mean that we're not called to be in community with those folks as well. So if you do have thoughts and you want to share that with us, feel free to check out our website, and you can drop us an anonymous message via the Ask Me Anything link, or you can even record a message and leave us a message and we can play it on our podcast too. Be happy to do that. Feel free to send us your comments and thoughts, whether you agree or vehemently disagree. We'll be happy to talk through that. So I know it's a touchy subject. Talk to the experts, talk to your medical doctor before making any kind of decisions if you haven't been vaccinated or if you're thinking about it. But I think all of us can agree on one thing. We want to get back to normal. I think that's something that we would love to see. So, Jeswin, thanks for talking through this critically with us, and looking forward to the next touchy subject that we tackle.
All right. Thank you, Jobin. And hopefully for those listening out there, please don't demonize us on this one.
Please don't demonize us. That'd be horrible. All right, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Have a good one.